Welcome to this chapter of the St. Andrew Society of Detroit's Oral History Project. This project was the undertaking of the Charles S. Lowe Memorial Library Committee to capture members' recollections of the society. Recorded in March of 2018, these are the memories of Bob Giles, former Society trustee, president, first and second vice president, and Highland Games chair.
I'd like to start by thanking you for doing this, Van, because it's a challenge. I know there's a lot of work involved in this. It's something that should be done, and I'm glad you're doing it, because there's a lot of history walking around at our meetings and day-to-day basis. There are a lot of things that people do individually that don't get mentioned, and it should. I'm glad that we have the opportunity in doing this right now to record what we can. So thank you for that. I've done various things in the society, all very rewarding, from just being, a person who picks up trash at the games to somebody who is in charge of actually running the thing. So with that broad perspective, I do want to cover a few things that I think are important as we record the history of the society, at least from my perspective. And I understand when you do this, history is written several different ways. Who are you talking to and who's writing it? I understand that. So it's always somewhere in the middle. Everyone has their own take on it, and you put them all together, and somewhere in between is the truth. My whole professional career in journalism, that is to find the truth. I think that if you wanted to characterize what my approach has been here, it's always asking the question, what's possible? Because I think some members relish the fact that we are steeped in tradition, and that's good, and things should operate the same way every time. Change is good. You have to stay current. The society should be reflective of what's happening outside our doors as much as what's happening inside our doors. So I think it's important to say, what can we do? What is the potential of our society, of every member? How far can we go? And I've kind of done that any way I can in any position I've had in everything I'm doing. I can say that I've been a member since October 1995. I attended meetings before that and finally became a member. And in the past 23 years, I think I've contributed quite a bit. Very satisfying, too. One of the real challenges that I had was being a chairman of the Highland Games. The problem was the current president, and this is in 1999, the president was having tremendous problems with the two people she had appointed as co-chairman. And she said every time they'd meet, they'd start fighting and nothing would happen. So she said, Bob, you've got to take this thing over. I said, I don't know how to run Highland Games. And she said, Bob, you're the only person who can do it. You've got to come in and do it. And I said, all right. This is December before the Highland Games in 2000. I went to the first meeting, and sure enough, the two chairmen were at odds with each other. And one picked up his book he had with him and slammed it down the desk and said, I'm going. We'd meet the next week, and the other person would slam his book down and depart. So this happened back and forth. I said, you're both knowledgeable. I'm glad you both want to contribute, but we have to find a way of doing this. We did, and a lot of the issues really developed because the previous games chairman didn't want to do it. He had absolutely no records to give us. We had no idea what a budget was about, and we just had to invent everything. So I asked a man by the name of Tom Bookless, who is a member still, absolutely a genius with numbers. He came up with a budgeting system that we still use today. And I said, everyone, is going to get a budget. We're going to guess on how much money we have, and we're going to go and try to do these games. So I divvied it up. I said, now, let's not argue about this. This is your area of responsibility. You're not running his part. He's not running your part. Just do it. And all of a sudden, with that budget paraphernalia in hand, everyone seemed to understand they had control over something, and that's where their area was. We went on to do it, and soon I found out that not only was that a problem, but the previous chairman had angered a lot of elements of the game, in that the clans said, we're not coming back. We had a horrible relationship with your police department in Livonia. And I said, I'm going to call a dinner. I'll pay for the dinner. We'll meet. I want everyone to feel like, they're part of something. You organize it. You run it. I'll be there. I'll have the police department from Livonia at the meeting. They'll hear what your complaints are, and we'll just move it from there. And sure enough, we had a nice meeting. Everyone kind of shook hands and grabbed each other and said, okay, that's great, let's do it. We had a person who ran our patrons tent who didn't want to do it again. That was a huge issue because not only was it a money generator, but it also was a huge expense item. And we were having various people give us suggestions on how to run the patrons tent. And for that year, I wanted to up it and have a beautiful tent there rather than just kind of a sloppy kind of tent we had. So we increased the budget for that. With little did I know that the caterer who we finally picked was charging us per individual and not as a total budget. So the cost of that was $16,000. And that is exactly where we were deficient at the end of the event. I called a friend at GM and I said, I need you to sponsor the Highland Games. And he said, what do you need? I said, $16,000. He said, it's okay, you got a check. So we broke even that year, but it was a real struggle. Following that, we had a meeting. The newly elected president said, I want to change things. I had moved the Cayley from an off-site location to the grounds that year. I thought we should do that Friday night, be fun, under a big beer tent, have a Cayley there. We had got the tent set up already. Let's move it there. So we had a meeting, and the new president said, now, I think we're doing too much. I want to cut back. There'd be no Cayley. And I said, wait, what do you mean no Cayley? He said, we just don't have the people to do it. I said, well, ask for more people. He said, no, we're not going to do that. And I said, I hate that because I was thinking of trying to expand Sunday morning into some kind of ecumenical pancake breakfast because the tent is still there until noon or whenever we tell him to take it down. And he has one more shot at doing something for the community. And he said, no. He had about 20 no's. And I said, well, I tell you what. I said, this is not where I hoped this meeting was going. 2 people got up, walked away. The next morning, he sent me a letter, a copy that he said, I'm resigning as president. All right, so he resigned as president. I was the first vice president. That meant I now became the president. So not only did I have the games tour, now I'm the president for the next year. That was by far great experience, but I tell you what, the club has always had wonderful, wonderful members who step up and do things, and that's really the strength and power of our group. But there's so many examples of what I was trying to say earlier about what's possible. There's so many things I can mention here. I brought the Battlefield Band in from Glasgow to the Royal Oak Music Theatre. The club sponsored that. We picked up 20 new members by doing that. I think it cost us about $700, but we picked up 20 new members in doing it. It was great outreach. People remember that. We did so many things back then that are just remarkable. Currently, I'm involved in finally rescuing this Robert Hopkins painting. By description, the Robert Hopkins painting was done by Mr. Hopkins, who was a very famous marine artist back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was a member of the St. Andrews Society. He was actually born in Scotland, came to this country, became a very accepted artist. The Detroit Institute of Arts owns 2 of his paintings. The gift he had to the society was a fairly large 8-foot by 9-foot portrait of Robert Burns, one that I believe to be the largest portrait of Robert Burns in the world. I've found nothing larger than that. Something may exist that I know about, and it's not complete, but at this point in my mind, it's one of the largest portraits of Robert Burns. He gave that to the society. It hung for many years in the lounge upstairs of the club downtown. Well, when we sold the club, the painting was ours, and we had no place to put it except on a big roller, and that went into somebody's basement, somebody's attic, somebody's back room, somebody's storage hall, a garage, and so forth. As people got tired of holding it, they'd move it to the next person to take care of it. It was in pretty bad shape when we got it, and people had tried for about 8 years to find the money to restore it. Because it's so big, the average price from a reputable restoration artist was approximately $35,000. That's how bad shape it was in. I mean, those are consistently quotable numbers, so it's not like we got bad information. We couldn't get the funding. About 3 years ago, I said, all right, I'll do it. I'll take it on. And I started a thing called Bucks for Burns. We tried a few things that really didn't do it. It didn't catch on. I thought it was a clever thing, but it didn't catch on. And we made an appeal to our members and so forth. And we've been raising money ever since. Within the last year, one of our members, a very prominent person in Detroit, modern Detroit's history, I should say, Chuck Forbes, got involved in the thing. He called and he said, Bob, what can I do? And I said, well, here's where we are. His career at Ford Motor Company in land acquisition was very successful. He invested all the money he had in buying old theaters downtown. So at one point he owned almost 15 theaters in the downtown area, including the Fox. He said, I tell you what, I have a restoration artist that I use for everything I do downtown, all of my theaters, everything. He's marvelous. Victor will do this for you, and I will make sure that you get the money to complete this thing. And we signed that agreement with a handshake. We took the painting down to his place almost 7 months ago. And it took a couple months just to figure out where he's going to do it, because his studio is in the basement, and once the thing was restored, we couldn't get it out of the basement. It's that big. So Chuck Forbes found a floor in one of his buildings downtown, the Colony Club, second floor, that was not being used, and he gave Victor and us, essentially, a third of that floor It's all cordoned off with visqueen and so forth as a place to restore this painting. We've been going down there on a frequent basis just to check the progress. It's a remarkable, remarkable restoration. The thing that is really helping is that the technology of restoration has changed dramatically since we first started the project and today, so that new chemicals and new procedures are in place now that 10 years ago didn't exist. Essentially what he's done, if I may explain, is create a honeycombed aluminum backing for the painting, which when we gave it to him was on this roller, but when he rolled it out, it looked like the ocean waves. It was all curly and a mess. Big chunks were missing and so forth, and you couldn't see any of the detail of the painting. It was just like a brown piece of canvas. So what Victor has done essentially is build a backing that is the size of the painting, 8 feet by 9 feet, out of a honeycomb aluminum product that's available in Minneapolis. It was created actually for this. It's that big, but it only weighs less than 30 pounds. So it's a huge piece of metal that's very lightweight. And around that he's created a wood frame, a very narrow wood frame, and over both sides of it he's created a thin aluminum panel. So the painting will be, or is being, glued piece by piece on one side of this aluminum. That will keep it straight, that will keep it flat, and it won't get that curly look anymore. I'm very impressed with how things are turning out. We've discovered some detail in the painting we didn't know existed. There's a church in the background. There's a bridge in the background at Tam O'Shanter. There's boots that we couldn't tell if Burns had boots on or not, and we can see his face now. So it's a really remarkable thing. And we have finally found the signature of Robert Hopkin on the painting. We thought that was lost. It's there. It's a very exciting project, but it's taken a lot of work. What's really wonderful about this, too, is another member is contributing all his time to create a documentary that he thinks is good enough to be on Netflix when it's done. It's all about the restoration of this painting. He's done some traveling for it. Every time we go down there, he brings his staff of camera people down there. He's got very expensive equipment to shoot this thing. And I think he's spot on when he says it's going to be good. Because when you see how painstaking this operation is, some of the pieces of canvas are smaller than a dime. And, where does this piece go in the painting? It's a huge puzzle as much as anything. So it's quite a remarkable event that I'm being witness to here and being a part of.
Let me ask you this, Bob. When do you anticipate the completion of the restoration will be? And once that's done, where do you see the possible placing of the Robert Burns painting?
Well, it's going to be done soon. I know that. I have another meeting with him in 2 weeks, and I'll probably get a better idea then. You need to know that Victor has been doing this in his spare time. He's very busy with Chuck Forbes, and Chuck says, we know you want to do this. Just whenever you have a few minutes, it's yours. Now, we've been paying him for all the materials he's purchased. The glue he's using is like $125 a gallon. It's just remarkable how these things add up. So it's not like he's doing this for free. We are actually, paying him for his time. He may end up getting $1 an hour the way it sounds here. He's putting a lot into it. But at the same time, he wants this done. He looks at this as a tremendous effort on his part because his boss is so interested in it too. Now, where's it going to go? Well, when we started this thing, we didn't know, and at this moment, we don't know. Part of the problem is we know it's going to go somewhere in this building, the Kilgore Center here in Troy, but we don't know where. When the artist first looked at it, he says, I want it to go in the boardroom, where you now have a TV at one end. He said, I think it'd be great on that wall. It's too big for the wall. So now we're looking at either the Burns room, which would make sense, or our big room. I mean, there's only so many places this thing's going to go. Because not only is it 8 by 9, it's going to have a frame around it, add another foot on every side to it. A plain black frame, much like it was when it hung downtown. What I hope, and believe me, this project has been done amidst a lot of criticism. Because people within the society, and believe me, I stood up there at the podium and took it all. People in the society said, well, it's only going to be worth $1,000 when it's done. Well, all right, but it's our $1,000. It's something that society has. It's part of our past. We don't have a lot of things that connect us to our long history. Very few things. This is one of those things, and it's a remarkable thing. I think it's going to not only give us some attention when it's finally unveiled, it's going to be a destination for Scots. Scots are going to say, this is on our map. We want to see this huge painting of Robert Burns. So I think we can't really fully understand what it's going to be in the future, but I think it'll be a destination for some. I think it'll put the Kilgore Center on the map. And I think those kind of things will happen, which will far out benefit somebody saying it's worth $4,000. And that's fine. The other criticism was we already have a lithograph of Robert Burns hanging on the wall. All right, now we have two. So what? And the one person says, I love this one. Why do we make so much of Robert Burns? All right. Maybe you need to go find another place to participate, because we're all about Robert Burns here. He means a lot to us, and I think it's important to have these touchstones to our past, and that's what this is. With great pride that I was able to get into this project and go where we are. But it does prove one thing they say about fundraising, and that is 80 to 90% of all the funds you raise will come within the group you're raising them for. You look outside, you think, well, there are grants, there's big corporations with foundations who are just looking for you to, well, a lot of times the match isn't there. There's nothing in it for them, or they can't see the match. So you're ignored, or you're passed by for something else that you think is ridiculous, but they think is wonderful. The people in your society are the ones who are really going to support this, and we've had that kind of tremendous support. We've had several of our members who've given up to $1,000 in the restoration project. I admire that level of participation. I admire somebody sending us $1. We've had some of those. Some of our fish fries people would hear about it and give us their change. And that's how you raise money. And with that kind of support, it's got to be wonderful. And even if you don't like the painting at the end, you got to love the story. So,
Speaking of the story, can you tell a little bit from the things you have seen in the painting so far? You mentioned the boots, but can you maybe detail a little bit, maybe some of the symbolism?
well, we don't have it yet. That's our problem. We just discovered a couple things last time we were there. I'd like to answer this question at a later date if I could, because I think we'll know even better the symbolism is. I think the symbolism is there. We know it's there. And I think as he works on this, we'll have a better idea. I'd rather that story be told once we have a complete dossier on this thing.
Let's go back to the games real quick. You were talking about the games at the very beginning. The games experience that you had there, were these all at Greenmead? And before Greenmead, as a member, do you remember anything of the games at the Henry Ford Estate or at Historic Fort Wayne?
Well, I certainly remember the games at the Ford Estate. That's where I started in my participation, doing some work there. I do remember the time when they were saying, we only allow 10,000 people maximum in here. And we say, we only had 9,914. We were counting, but, the person who was counting maybe has stopped at some point. So we know we had more than 10, but we didn't admit to it in so many words. So the next year, they had their own counters, and they were counting them. We went 11,000 and something. And so they said, you're out of here. You can't do this next year. So we had to find another place. And we spent quite a while looking. We had various locations here and there. I think Greenmead was a wonderful choice. I remember when we met with the folks at Greenmead and Livonia, they said, we'll give you a year, and I demanded a 3-year contract. They said, okay, we'll give you a 3-year contract, but if you are rowdy, if you cause more problems or damage than you can handle, we have the right after 1 year of bouncing you out, but you do have 3 years at this rate. So we did that. We moved there. When I was games chairman, I think it was the second year we were there, the format of the layout was fine, but it wasn't perfect. And we moved a few things around here and there. We annoyed some people, but we said, this is better for everybody. I'm sorry. And it's been a wonderful location for us, not only because it gives you little pockets of identity, just the way the place is laid out and how we use them, but it has tremendous parking and allows us to do a lot of off-site parking, as you know, and it gives us a location that is really spot center for a lot of the people in southeast Michigan. So it's been a good relationship, and we've helped Greenmead expand their story and their reach too, just by the people we bring in there. They've enjoyed the relationship. City of Livonia has enjoyed it. They publicize it. Obviously we let the mayor say a few words every year. So he gets his moment of glory in our games, and that's fine. The politicians all show up to celebrate and recognize what we do there every year. It's a remarkable story. We have the oldest continuous games in North America, and I remember the time that the folks in Antigonish in Nova Scotia contacted us and said, "You can't say that. Our games are older." And they said, "No, our games are older." And we went back and forth. They started the same year, but actually their games were a little bit later than ours, so we said ours are older by a few months, so we're going to claim this as the oldest continuous. Now, the reason continuous is in there is because there were Highland Games long before that in Boston and Washington and so forth, but they didn't last. Ours did. And it's a remarkable story, not only of perseverance, but of volunteering. And we get people from other games in other parts of the country coming here saying, "How do you get 400 people to volunteer for this thing? We can't do that. We just don't know how you guys do that." And it's not easy, of course, I know that, but we do it.
Just in regard to when you were the games chairman, Saturday morning, cars are starting to roll in. Think back of maybe some of your thoughts at the beginning of a Saturday morning for the games.
Well, I didn't sleep the night before. I remember that. I thought, oh my gosh, what if it all collapses? What if it all fails? And this is going to be horrible. But the thing is, at that point, it's all under remote control. You have really no control over it once it starts. It either is going to move ahead or it's going to go flat on its face, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it. So I said, you know what, I'm going to try to enjoy what's happening in front of me. And of course, it goes by in a flash. Everything is happening so quickly, and people are yelling things at you all day long. And you're saying, go here, do this, do that. And you can imagine, what it's like. Your team has a problem every 5 minutes, but you just keep answering a question. I remember I was in a cart running around the place like crazy, just making sure that everyone was in their place. And, with the history we've had of the thing, of course they're going to be in their place. Everyone knows what they're doing at that point, and they get it done. They've done it before. It's just a remarkable thing to see it all happen. But I remember, I think I slept for a whole day the next day. Oh, no, we had to collect garbage the next day. What am I thinking? The president who had contacted me to say, "Bob, you got to do this, there'll be no games," came to me and said, "Thank God it's over." I said, that's how I feel. Because I was working at Channel 7 at the time. It's not like I was just doing this. I was putting in 12-hour days as you do in broadcasting. This kind of was just another thing that had to happen, or it wasn't going to happen. But once we got going, it did happen. I remember being there, as you asked the question, that morning, looking at it. It was a beautiful day. I had 2 television stations there, and Darren McCarty was there. I had him in there doing a frozen haggis toss. For $2, you could compete with Darren McCarty and see if you could throw the haggis farther. We raised some money there. Anyway, we had a great day. We had no incidents of injuries, and it's just one of those things where you think, I'm glad it's over. So let's work on the next one.
As a former games person, you mentioned the volunteers. Over 400 volunteers annually help participate with the games. Who are some of these different people that come in to help, and what do they get out of it?
Well, part of the problem is I would never know every one of them because they show up that day. They're friends or family of some of our members. And I'd get introduced, and gosh, I can't remember 200 new names in a day, but you'd see the husbands of some of our members, the wives of some of our members there. They said, I've got to get this done. I've got to pound these steaks. I've got to put these flags up. I've got to do this and that and everything else. So, as I say, I can't tell you by name, but I can tell you that it's not only our members, and not all of our members do participate, which has always been a problem. I'm sure you talk to other former games people, and they'll tell you the same thing, that even though we tell new members when they join, you better participate in our Highland Games, not everybody shows up, and it's unfortunate. However, I think we both know that people join an organization for a variety of reasons, and the reasons that I join are not the reasons you join. What I want out of it is not what you want out of it. And the level of participation is different than your level. You can't demand that everybody have the same level. At the same time, you can make it appealing so people do want to participate and give what they can. There are a lot of physical limitations for people, too. What's remarkable is to see some people, even with a walker, at the games, they're members, and they're doing what they can. They either sit down and sell T-shirts. They're there participating, even though there's maybe a pain or two in the back and the leg. They're there doing it. And I think that's a remarkable story. How people can rise above and say, this is what I've been asked to do, I'll do it.
In setting up the games, running the games, even the cleanup after the games, I imagine amongst the volunteers, there may be individual groups, that there's just a lot of camaraderie.
Well, there is, and that's important. We know that not everyone wants to clean up. That was the hardest part of getting volunteers. And so early on, one of the members said, well, you call the county and you get the people who need some social community hours. So we would call the county and say, we need 50 people who need some hours to come over and pick up garbage. And we did that for many years. I think it's still happening. There are a lot of resources out there that you just have to put heads together and say, what do you think about this? And that's the great part about the games meetings. You've attended them. You know that everyone has an idea and contributes, wonderfully to the success of the games. It's not one person. You're the games chairman, but, title. It's everyone doing 100% that makes the thing work. Is always remarkable to me is that everyone has good ideas. Everyone has really strong ideas on how to make it better. So not only do we have the games, we soon after that have a shakeout meeting where we actually sit down and say, how do we make it better? And that's wonderful that we want it better every time. We want the world's greatest Highland Games, and it's easy to market that. Say, you have the best Highland Games in the world. Oh, yeah, show me. Well, come on and we'll show you.
You've traveled around. You might have been to other Highland Games. What do you see as the difference?
Well, the funny thing is, Highland Games are Highland Games are Highland Games wherever you go, because there's a format, there's a routine, there's a consistency, and for a Scot, that's wonderful. You know what to expect. You know that the athletes are going to be competing the same way. They're going to be throwing the same caper. The Highland dancers will be dancing the same dances, and you can evaluate them one to the next. I think that the bands are wonderful when they compete. So there's a similarity. Other games, the games in Chicago are good. It's a different kind of games. It's in a big field. It's different because of their sponsorships. They honor their sponsorships like crazy. I mean, they go overboard to make sure that it's the Hudson and Hudson tent. The stage is named after this person. So, and that works for them, and that's fine. That's how they get their money, and that's how they do it. Every game looks different because of the location. You're outside, and they're fun. But there's the consistency that I love, that that you're going to hear the same pieces of music played by the bands. You're going to see everyone looking spiffy when they march, when they dance. The clans are going to be shouting out their slogans when they pass in review. So every games is different, but every games is wonderful to attend. There are actually 72 Highland Games and fairs in North America every year. So that kind of leads me to one thing I wanted to mention, too, that I was very proud of. Being in broadcasting, I worked with some very good engineers. And I remember one day back in the early 80s, one of my engineers came in and said, Bob, I kind of keep you involved in what's going on, and I just want to let you know that the boys out in Ann Arbor are coming up with this new thing called the World Wide Web. And I said, the World Wide Web, what's that? He said, well, they plan one day to connect everyone's computer to every other computer. And I said, you got to be kidding. You can't do that. He said, well, they think they can do it. And I said, well, how do they do it? He said, well, they're working on it out there. I said, well, keep me up on that. That sounds like a pretty good story. And, of course, he kept me up on it. And then he came in and says, now people are getting these names for their web pages. I said, well, how's that work? He said, well, it's called a URL. And I said, okay. I said, how do you get that? He said, well, America Online allows you to get theirs. And I went to the next meeting of the society, and I said, does anyone here know about this World Wide Web thing? And somebody said, yeah, I heard about it. And I said, well, what if I tried to get HighlandGames.com? And he says, there's 72 other groups that probably want it. And they said, well, what's that? And I said, well, it costs $70 to register the thing. Can I get $70 from the group to do it? I said, all right, okay. So we got it, and we've had it ever since. And having that name, of course, I think is a tremendous asset for the society. It's probably worth $15,000, $20,000 right now if you wanted to trade it or sell it. So we've had that for many, many years. We've also had a few others, too. Rod Harris and I have been kind of involved over the years, he more so than me now, in managing those identities. And it's been a matter of pride that we keep that. And Rod's been very good at making sure that it gets paid.
Can you talk a little bit about life before this beautiful Kilgore Center? What were meetings? What was life like for the society?
The society really existed as a group of members, and that was its charm and its appeal to me, because good, strong membership is always appealing to a prospective member. The people were interesting. The Highland Games were obviously interesting. That had a lot of appeal. That's why I wanted to become a member. But the first membership meeting I went to was at the Polish Century Club on the east side of Detroit. It was a nice facility. It seemed to fit everything that we needed as a group to do. I attended membership meetings for a couple of years before I actually decided to become a member. And at that point, when I decided to become a member, we were meeting at the Commonwealth Club on DeQuinder, north of 12 in Warren. The place was fine, actually kind of small in some respects, but big enough for our meetings and so forth. If we wanted to have a big event, we couldn't do it there. We had to go somewhere else, like St. John's out in Plymouth or something like that. We never could have any of our big events there. But for membership meetings, it worked just fine. They had a cash bar. They had a lounge room in the back. It was not sealed off properly, so the people who didn't want to attend a meeting would rather smoke and drink. We had to tell them to shut up all the time because they were louder than the membership meeting. That sound would just kind of come right through the curtain doors. But the membership meetings were fine. They would look a lot like what we're doing today, maybe a little more formal than they are today. I will say this, we have more music and more dancing now than we had back then. The band would play en masse. I mean, it was like the whole band would play at some of our formal events, our Burns Dinner, our Tartan Day, and so forth. And once in a while they'd play at our meetings, but not as much as we get right now. We get more music. Back then we were doing it piece by piece. I should say we would have them all come to one meeting, and the whole meeting would be, and now here's little Ian dancing with his sister Flora. And so the whole meeting would be that way, which is fine. I mean, you want to see the kids you're giving all this money to perform, and it means something to them. But at the same time, this way you get a shot every month, and it's a wonderful way to do it. We also were meeting at the White Heather Club in Ferndale when we couldn't meet in Warren. The White Heather Club was actually a spin-off club. They didn't like the way things were going at the St. Andrews Society, so they formed their own club. And it was on Vester Street, just north of 9 Mile, east of Woodward. It was actually one giant hall, but it had absolutely no charm. And it was a place that we would meet. It had Celtic connections, so it was a good choice. And the folks at the White Heather Club were very happy to rent the place out. But their membership dwindled. The people who formed the club were pretty much against us. And when the White Heather Club kind of went away, a lot of those folks, as I recall, came back into the society. So the meetings, to answer your question, were much of what you see today. There was a president who ran the meeting. We talked about our membership a bit. We talked about what we can do, where we're headed, and so forth. One thing that I did, and this will characterize kind of like the membership back then, too. In those early days, I'll say the early part of this century, probably starting about the year 2002, 2003, it dawned on me that we're really a charity. You know, we make money, but all the money we make, we give away. Everything we do, we contribute and volunteer. Sounds like a charity. So I brought up the notion that why don't we file to become a 501c3, because there are advantages operationally to be run as a charity rather than a social club. Put it before the members. We needed a 2/3 agreement, got maybe up to half. Some of the criticism was, well, if our forefathers want us to become a charity, they would have started it that way. We're talking about 1849. What are you talking about? They didn't know the word charity, 501c3 back then. There's no income tax. So things were working fine for these folks. Even though I was trying to make the case that this is a good thing for us, there are tax advantages to us as a club if we're a charity. If we're a charity and you make a donation to the club, you can write it off. It's a taxable deduction, so it's good for membership, too, in certain cases. I tried 3 times. We had a formal change of document that we voted on, tried 3 times over the course of maybe 4 years. It failed every time. So along comes the Kilgore family, and they offer to give us some money. And we find out it's $1.8 million if we're a charity. So the next meeting we said, now for a charity, we get $1.8 million. If we're not, we get $900,000. Now what do you want to do? So the thing went around within 30 seconds. We voted to apply for a charitable designation. And of course we're a charity because the IRS suggests that you have to wait 6 months to get the approval. We got it in 6 weeks. They said you're a charity. That was a remarkable thing that finally got through. It shows you that there's always a divergence of opinion in a group like this. And Scots have been known for their strong opinions. It's a pain in the butt, but it's also the charm of the group. You have people with strong opinions, and for a journalist or somebody like yourself who's been in this is the best part of life. I mean, finding out how people approach things, what they think about things, and what that means for tomorrow. But I truly enjoyed being on a committee, because a committee is where you find out about your other members. You form friendships with these people, you get close to them, and you find out that you're pretty proud of this group you're with, because these are really smart people on your committee, and by association, then it must be the whole group that way. Throughout the years, even in the early days at the Polish Century Club, right up through the Commonwealth Club, the membership has always been a strong group to deal with, and that's really the best part of the group.
What would you tell young people that are maybe just relatively new members or people that are not members yet? What would you tell them the benefit it is to them for joining and becoming involved?
Well, people join, as I mentioned, for a variety of reasons. It could be they're researching their own heritage. It could be that they're fascinated by the quirkiness of Scottish heritage and why do men wear kilts? Why do we throw telephone poles? And it's an unusual dance those kids are dancing there. And the bagpipe, how outrageous is that? So it could be a variety of reasons people are attracted to us. And you have to try to find out each one of them, why are they here? Mostly it's because of their heritage, I think. And if that's the case, we need to support that by giving them all the tools they need to research their history or tell them how to do it. But I would tell people that you don't have to be a Scot to love Scotland. You don't have to be a Scot to enjoy the St. Andrews Society, because if you like to be around very smart, intelligent people who like to do an awful lot for the community in outreach, then come look at us. One of the things that I truly enjoyed, when I was a trustee, I think for about 15 years, was I was running the benevolence program we had. And the benevolences we have are just remarkable. They really are. They really hit a broad reach of the community need. We have a couple that go into Scotland. We have tremendous support of all of the young people who want to learn about Scottish culture and music and dance and so forth. We support them in a big way. So I think the charm of the group has been that we focus a lot on the family. Not only do mom and dad get involved in this thing, we can involve kids too, their children, in a big way. The kids don't have to come to our membership meeting. I don't know any kid who'd want to sit through a membership meeting, but they can get involved in different ways. They can learn piping from David or somebody else. They can learn dancing. They can learn our history. They can come into this wonderful library we have and do research for maybe something at school. We're here to help. We're here to not only promote Scotland, but we're here to support our members in a wonderful way. And I think clubs who really survive are the ones that focus on family. We can do an awful lot for the family here. And I think if I were talking to somebody, I would say, if you have a family, think of us. There's a lot we can do to help you and get you involved. I think the things that we need to keep in mind, though, really relate to getting people involved as quickly as we can when they are new members. What kind of annoys me, and a lot of my cohorts here, are that at our meetings, people seem to sit at the same place all the time with the same people talking about the same things, rather than trying to do some outreach and getting to meet new members. Well, new members are a little green, a little fuzzy on this. They don't know where to sit. They want to feel welcome, but it's not usually in their power to make themselves feel welcome. Somebody here has to do that, and somebody has to extend your hand. It's always fun to meet your old friends here, but it's also important to say, a new face, what's your name? Come sit with me, I want to hear all about your story. So I think we need to do more to try to do that.
Let me ask you this about new members. When Shelby, my wife, became a member, she was brought in at a time where there were membership swearing-in ceremonies only twice a year. Now it's done at every meeting, where sometimes last month there was 3 members that were brought in. Months before that, maybe 7, 8, maybe up to 9 people brought in each month. Based on your association with the society, your experience, trustee, president, your advice, which way do you think is a better way to go and why?
Well, I'm going to go backwards here to when I became a member. What we did back then was one of the members would become a mentor to every new member. And that person would call him several times ahead of time. What do you do? Where are you from? Where you go? Is your family history and so forth? And how many kids do you have and whatnot? That member would introduce the new member. And we did this actually 3 times a year back then when I was doing it. It was a very special evening. It was a special dinner. Everyone wore their tartan. And the new members would bring members of their families and so forth. It was a kind of a special event. And I kind of look back thinking, that was a nice way to do it. We had, as I say, every new member then had somebody they could call. There's always that person who introduced them was their new friend. Everyone in the group would get assigned a new member over the year. You would have to do this as a member. I did it several times myself, and I thought it was a pretty good deal. I got to meet new people. They knew they could call me if they had a problem. But I think we need to get back to that. I think the induction ceremony itself needs to be shortened a bit to be more current. There are certain words in there that are important. There are certain words in there that need to be said. I think that the initial script was written to fit the St. Andrews Hall downtown, and it worked out fine. But, the knocking on the door and people are saying, what's that all about? It doesn't really fit anymore, does it?
You're talking about traditions. Are there other traditions that the society still hangs on to, or traditions that the society has lost that you think we should either pick back up again beyond the induction or in other ways?
Well, when I first became a member, people wore tartans at every meeting. You were just expected to be in some form of tartan, either in trews or kilt or something, at every meeting. And that's kind of fallen by the wayside. I know as our society gets more relaxed about clothing, that's the way it is. I think we need some meetings, at least, where we're expected to wear. And I appreciate the fact that the announcement came that at our Tartan Day event, you're expected to wear tartan. I know when you go to Scotland, you don't see anyone wearing tartans. I know that. For here, it's an American thing more than anything else, or North American thing. I know that. But at the same time, it's who we are. So if that's who we are, we should relish in that big investment we made in buying all that stuff. I think that there are things that on a monthly basis we could do more of. I think we could focus more on Scottish food than we do. In Scottish culture. Take an example of this is my recipe for whatever. There are things that we miss. We get very involved in the function of the evening and not involved in the history of who we are in our culture. We could do a whole heck of a lot with geography of Scotland. What's happening with other Scottish groups. There are a lot of things that we could communicate, we don't communicate, that would enrich our appreciation for who we are. I love the fact that we have a wonderful newsletter, and it's a big task. I write a newsletter for another group, and I know the problems that are involved in getting one together every month. But we get it done. It's great communication, and I think that we could probably do that in other ways, too. We need to communicate more about our identity. We need to communicate more about our heritage.
These are some of the things you see as what is possible.
What is possible, right. I remember, speaking of what's possible, I'm looking around this room, beautiful library. Early on, when we were trying to budget money for the renovation of this building, Dennis Clemens came to a meeting and said, I would like this room over here as our library. And I'd like to put some bookcases in there, get some donations for bookcases. And somebody said, well, how much is that? And Dennis came up with $500, $600 or something. I remember pounding my fist on the desk, and I said, no. I said, you're not going to ask for a paltry amount like that. I said, I want this building to have a world-class Celtic research library. And if it takes $10,000 to do it, then we need to spend $10,000 to make it a world-class library. Dennis, I want you to rewrite your request and come back next month and tell me what you need. And I am so proud of Dennis and the library group for what they've been able to do here. I mean, this has become a fabulous room because it's dreaming what's possible. Dennis should go up every month and say the book of the month in our meetings is whatever, and we have it in our library. Come and get it. One thing I wanted to say about the complete organization of the group is this, and this starts from day one, back in 1849. The society management was divided into two groups, one who did the daily operational thing and one who took care of the financial and so forth. And I understand why that was done, like our own Constitution. You divide up areas of power. No one person has a complete authority and control. Nobody knows what the trustees do. Very few people understand how we're put together here. And believe me, it took me a while to figure it out because we never explain it. The trustees, have a lot to do. They're managing a lot of money. They're investing the money. They're making sure that we don't run out of resources. And gosh, if you've ever had any of the executive committee positions, you work your butt off putting together monthly meetings, especially since we own a building. This is amazing that we're able to do what we do here. So I think we need to explain better to our membership how we're organized here and how new members can fit into it. New members have a lot of opportunities here.
As far as your interest in being a Scot, were you raised in a Scot-emphasized home? How did your interest begin? What eventually was it that made you look at the St. Andrews Society and want to become a member?
I had Scottish heritage on both sides, as a matter of fact. I didn't know I was a Scot. It's one of those things that it's just the way the world is. I grew up in Detroit. My mother, maiden name was McPhail, but on her side there were McKinnons, McPhails, MacArthurs, and so forth, so I have that. My father's had a stepdad, but his real father's name was Campbell. The thing that is remarkable is that you can grow up as a Scot and not really know you're a Scot, especially in Detroit, where there's 18,000 different heritages running around. We grew up in Detroit in an area that was diverse. The people who lived in the flat downstairs were Greek. The family on one side was Ukrainian, on the other side were Polish. So I grew up eating everybody's food, hearing all sorts of languages, like a little United Nations, and I loved it. I grew up thinking everyone's fine, the world is great. So my story is that I knew there was some Scottish heritage, but it didn't mean anything because we didn't do much about it. My mom was born in Canada, so, it's just like, you're Scot. We had a cottage in Point Pelee, Ontario, growing up, that the guy next to us was a bagpiper, and he'd every morning would get up with his bagpipes, and I heard bagpipe music, but I thought, all right, that's normal. After starting going to college, my best friend, who had been a friend over at Point Pelee growing up, John McIntosh, found out I was getting married. Getting married, Bob? Well, you got to do things about that. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you have to have your wife piped out of church. I said, what's that all about? He says, you don't know about that? I said, no. He says, yeah. He says, for gosh sakes, there must be some group or something you can call to get some pipers. So I called the St. Andrews Society. I don't know if I talked to Dave or who I talked to. I have no idea. It was back in '68. And they said, okay, yes, we'll get 2 pipers there for you. They're young folks, but they're both excellent. It's okay. So we come out of church, and they're the 2 pipers, and they pipe us down to the Clinton Inn where we had our reception. And I thought, that's pretty good. That's pretty neat. That's pretty Scottish. That's great. I like that. Well, it went on, and my sister-in-law started doing research about our heritage. And she would spend a week or 2 out in Salt Lake City going through their records. And she started coming up with names back into Canada, that were very Scottish. These MacPhails, and McKinnon, and MacArthur. This is all interesting stuff here, It was her research that really got me interested in what we were doing. So at that point, I think my wife said, you need to maybe join this group and get a little more interested in what they're doing if this is your heritage, which is one of the reasons I started going to a couple of meetings over at the Polish Century Club. When my sister-in-law finally made the connection to the Isle of Egg, where my ancestors came from, the McKinnons, my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, we went over there for the first time, this tiny island, and stayed with some people in a hotel. There's 60 people lived on the island. And I really felt a part of something. I thought, I feel like I'm home. This is it. All of a sudden it all made sense. And the lady we stayed with told us that they were trying to buy the island. And I said, we didn't buy the island. There's a laird of the island. We don't like what he's doing, and we're going to blah, blah. So I came back, and I told the people at the St. Andrews Society, I just went to Egg, and they're trying to buy the island. They're trying to raise money to buy the island. And Flo Stahl said, well, we'll have a Cayley. We'll raise money, and we'll send that money off to them. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, we had a Cayley at the Commonwealth Club, and we raised almost $2,000 passing the hat. I couldn't believe it. And we sent it off. We were the first contributors to their cause, and they still remember that. And I felt completely indebted to the group at that point. I said, you know what? This is a damn fine group.
This presentation of the St. Andrews Society of Detroit's Oral History Project was produced by Van Rohr for the St. Andrews Society of Detroit's Library Committee under the direction of Dennis Clemens, current chairperson, and Shelby Brown Rohr, current St. Andrews Society of Detroit's communication director. This project celebrates the 169th year of the St. Andrews Society of Detroit. Salante.